Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's special episode of Navigating the Weight. Today, we'll be exploring a very sensitive but very important topic: options to parenthood. Globally, it's said that 1 in 6 couples faces infertility. And whilst that number is stark, it's known that over the past 5 decades, the incidence has been increasing. Yet, despite this challenge, discussions around options to parenthood, especially alternatives to biological conception, remain largely under-discussed. So, our goal today is to shed light on this topic and the journey of couples, specifically women, who have courageously explored or considered other paths to parenthood, where they will talk about personal reflections, including their journey to adoption, surrogacy, and more, and hope to shed light on this topic for couples still waiting. So joining me today are two incredible women. First, pharmacist Bumi Olugbeja, who happens to be the author of Joyful, as well as Mrs. Bukola Adeyemi, who is the main character in the book Navigating the Weight Through Faith and Science: Our Journey to Parenthood. Welcome you both.
Thank you.
So starting with you, Bumi, could you please share with us what felt like a personal turning point and reflection for you as you explored the decision to seek other options to parenthood?
So first, for me, the conversation about adoption had been in the, I'd say, background. And no, it's not because there's history of infertility in my family. For perspective, I'm the last of five, or two older siblings who, would get pregnant almost immediately. So it's not like there were issues that were on the burner, and that was the reason. It was just because I liked the concept, the thought of adoption. I just like the whole idea, interestingly, of caring for a little one that you didn't birth. And so I discussed with my then fiance, my husband, and I told him about the fact that maybe I like that, and I don't know whether it was because, of course, maybe it was being a good guy, maybe so that I'll think, oh, great choice of partner. But he had agreed. He said he liked the thought of adoption as well, and said, oh yeah, when our kids are older, we could explore that. When children are older, out of the uni, or maybe in uni, that empty nest syndrome, yeah, and that maybe when we're there, we could then adopt a little toddler who, of course, gets our group back, gets us all racy, running around the house and all of that. So it was something that had been there. So maybe I would say the seed had been sown. And then just to, of course, our journey progressed, and seemed like nothing was happening. A few failed IVFs later, or maybe in between one of those IVFs, I'd bring up the conversation and ask him that, we were talked about adoption. Do you remember? And he says, yes, you remember. Then I said, how about doing this now? And there's this thing about faith, and for Christians, and I'm hoping that, I guess we get to that at some point. There's this thought where you think that exploring options means that you are not trusting God. We can seem to think that it means that you no longer believe God. And so every time that we got there, it's okay, oh, let's wait, or give me all those spiritual answers. Let me pray about it. Let me hear what the Lord say. Those kind of things. But then I guess at some point, we just had to sit down and say, come, why are we not doing this? Because for me, like I said, the seed had been sown. So I guess for me, I was just thinking, okay, so is it the possibility that we should do that now before maybe our own kids will come while we still trust in faith? So for me, that thought was always there. And then we had that conversation. Interesting, one of those days, he had agreed to it, and I guess that was that. So for me, it wasn't really like it was just a seed that had been there, but it just became bigger. So it wasn't necessarily about the length of the wait. It was about, I would say that I had we had looked at the possibility before. So honestly, maybe my story will be different from a lot of other people. I know that for others, maybe it's the length of time, it is the weight, and truth be told, all of that is perfectly okay as well. Whenever that anyone decides to do that, that's that. But that's my story. That was what it was about.
I really love the spin you put on it, where you said it's your story and how your experience is unique, where you talked about the arc of that decision, where it started way before, when you even got to the point where you had to then grapple with the fact that, okay, maybe we are facing infertility. So turning to you, Bukola, could you share your own experience of how you made that decision? Like, what were the things that, got you to that point?
All right, thank you. I would say my story is a little bit different from Bumi's
Mhm.
because I never thought of that even before I got married. And when I got married and I wasn't conceiving, and after doing everything the doctor recommended, surgeries, procedures, IUIs, IVFs, and still nothing was happening. Then at that stage, I said, okay, I think we are at that bridge where we have to do something else. We have to consider either adoption or surrogacy. And so while we were still in Nigeria, then after like the first three failed IVFs, and then my husband was to relocate to the US, and at that point I just said, you know what, let's adopt, and then we agreed. You know, spoke with my mother-in-law, God bless her, and then she started the process and all of that. Even though we didn't go through, and then we left it halfway. We went back. We went to the US. We got here again, and I started another, medical intervention here and there, and still nothing. And then I remembered we started something back home in Nigeria. I think it's time for us to pick it up from there. And so that was the defining moment for me.
Mm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Spin. And like you said, stories are unique, and different.
Mhm.
And you've both touched on a lot of factors that influence you both to get into that point. So a follow-up question starting with you, Bumi, is how did your faith, your support system, because it looks like you have an incredible support system, and your cultural background, influence making the decision?
So first off, my faith, and really it's just my faith, because so maybe support system in terms of my husband, yes, as well. I mean, I'll talk about each of them very briefly. But in terms of cultural, um, it I would say it's a me thing. And then so because of where I sit now, and when I have those conversations with women, um, I'll typically say that ultimately it's your decision. But one of the things that could help sometimes is us leaning on our wiring. And there's something that I think that God uniquely would do for us. Sometimes God is giving us a largeness of heart to be able to explore other options, and to be able to accept these other things. But it's just that if we're not careful, maybe faith as well, is making us push that back. Like I said earlier on, when I talked about the fact that for me, I've been thinking about the fact that does it mean that we don't trust God anymore? Because to be honest, it's not just my husband, even me as well. You know how maybe in between a prayer conference or one of those things, we talked about adoption before. Then I'll go to sleep again, and maybe 4 months after I'll wake up. It's not happening, no.
Mhm.
So all those yo-yo things, it's normal. So, but to speak about maybe the defining faith, what helped is one of the my I call it the well, I mean, we would call it the fatherhood of God. One
Mm.
of the things that has always been settled in my heart, and which is one of the things that I teach women as well on this space, is that God, and I'm glad that this is also a faith-based conversation. You see, God has our best interest at heart. If there's something that needs to settle in our hearts, that is it. such that even when we don't understand the plan, and like there's a song I really like, it says, when you don't understand, when you don't see his plan, when you can't trace, when you can't trace his hands, trust his heart, right?
Mm.
So that is the defining thing for me, to know that God is my father. And if it's that is not working now, maybe there's something else he would have me do. And that was the reason why, because I hope you know that even as we speak, what this one we're talking about alternate to parenthood is even very extreme. I hope you know that there are some people who even believe that even IVF in itself is not a good thing, that
Absolutely.
is anti-faith, right?
Yeah.
So it's the ability to understand that if it is not happening, what would God want me to be doing in this situation? Are there other things that I could look at, that I could explore? So my own faith was to say, I mean, God has my best interest at heart, and He wants me to become a mother. So if it's not happening in the traditional way, what else should I be doing? And so I started to, pray about it. Like I said, those yo-yo times, but then I eventually would settle back and then I'll think about it. That the fact that this thing had always been somewhere in your heart, that seed, maybe this is what the Lord would have you do. And of course, that was eventually what we did. So my faith, the support system, in terms of my husband, I'm blessed. I like to say, I mean, I enjoyed, um, and still do enjoy my marriage, which was one of the things that I encapsulated when I wrote the book Joyful, Practical Tips that helped me thrive while trying to conceive. Because I'd written that book even before the adoption, right? I wrote that book while, interestingly, I actually wrote that book in between. I just had some embryo transfer, and that's when I sat down to write that book. Interestingly, that IVF failed as well, right?
Mm.
So support system in terms of the fact that my marriage is good. I was able to look at other things, but cultural. My parents were not in support of that decision. No. So I think ultimately it's the individual. It's you coming to decide, what do I want to do. And for me, faith went a long way in trusting God, and just following His plans and other things He would have me do.
Bumi, I'm sure you've heard this a lot. You speak so profoundly and so passionately and deeply about stuff. So I can't wait to when we explore more about joyful and to just listen to how you've also shared and encouraged other women like you talked about. So thank you for sharing all of those deep insights.
Thank
So Bukola, a quick
you.
follow-up question for you. Similar to Bumi, was there something like an event or something that happened to you or an insight that got you shifting your mindset from waiting to exploring?
Oh, yes. I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier. And I talked about what really changed my mindset. First was when, after doing everything, nothing was still working. You know, did all the things that I could imagine, and all the things that the doctors recommended, and still nothing was happening. So it was at that point that I knew that I need to start looking at other options. And most importantly, my husband and myself, we didn't have issues with adoption, because we talked about it also while we were still waiting and doing all of those procedures. And he was like, it's okay. And also, I had the same thing, it's okay. And I could remember that we spoke to my mother-in-law, and immediately she was like, it's okay. Oh, if that's what we want. Oh yeah, that's
Wow.
immediately she started pressing button.
Wow.
And she's a nurse, but she's now retired. And then she was working in University of Ilorin Teaching Hospital. So she had all this network of where she could get children and all of that, how she could adopt and how she could go about it. So she was at the forefront for us. And she will call me, Bookie, I saw somebody today. I went to one orphanage. The child looks like you and your husband.
Wow.
In fact, God bless her. Honestly, God bless her. So it was at that point when I saw enthusiasm, and I'm like, okay, she's not even the one wanting to adopt. And I could see the support she was giving us. Honestly, At that point, my mind was settled. My husband's mind was settled that this is the time for us to adopt. And I didn't even talk to my parents about it. Probably this is the first time my mom, maybe when she watches this video, that will be the first time she will get to know that we ever thought about adoption. And then surrogacy. So we also talked about surrogacy because that's another option that we wanted to explore. Back in Nigeria, we didn't really want to do that, but when we got here and we decided, okay, since we got here, adoption was now becoming almost impossible
Mm,
because we were not living in Nigeria again. So we talked about surrogacy, and we had gathered the funds, we had gotten a team and everything, but it didn't work out because we had to use the funds to do something else in the US. And then I have this friend, I'll call her a sister. One day I just told her that, you know what, I need her help to help me, be a surrogate. And she agreed because I know she has done it. She had helped a family some years back, to help them carry the baby. And then I told her, and she was like, whenever you're ready, whenever you're ready. I was like, this is another good sign. Oh, it's like everything, God is just arranging everything for me. But eventually it still didn't we didn't go through with it because when you look at the costs, insurance will not cover her because they told me that my doctor had to write an official report that I couldn't carry my own baby. That was the only way insurance would have covered her. So we honestly at that point I was ready to do anything that came through, whether adoption or surrogacy, because I'm like, okay, I think I've tried. And then my husband would say, no more injections, no more procedures, no more this. He was very clear on that. And I'll be like, let's try. He said, no, why can't you try other options? Let's try this, let's try that, let's try this. And
mm,
okay, I will agree, but before we know it, there will be roadblocks on the road that we have to circle back again and say, at this point, I don't think this will work. So, yes, we're open to that. Probably if we were still in Nigeria, honestly, I think we'll have adopted a child
go through
a
the
long time
process.
ago. Yes, we will
Yes,
have done that. We'll have gone through the process. Yes.
yes,
Because we have to be speaking about advocacy and
Mm,
yes,
um,
yes.
trying to make people understand why, as against having abortions when you don't want
Mm,
the when you don't want a child. We have to be looking at how that we culturally as a people should be, and I say this carefully, in inverted commas, increasing the bank of
mm,
children that are available for adoption, because that's another conversation. Because the
mm,
current situation is that the demand in terms of women who want to adopt is actually more than the supply in terms of the
mm,
availability of children. And I'm speaking to legal adoption. I'm
okay.
not
okay.
talking of baby factories that is an
Mm-hmm.
exchange for money.
Mm,
Okay.
The bank of children available legitimate in orphanages is
Mm.
not that large.